So welcome, welcome, welcome. This is our monthly mastermind training, a master class with an author. How honored are we to have Stacy joining us? Yay! A
Yay!
newly published author. This is so exciting. And if you haven't bought this book, you've got to get her book. You just absolutely have to get a book. Um, you, I wonder if Alan, you could put it in the link from the Amazon so that people can buy it if they want to. It is such an easy read. And you can see that I do the whole tags and highlights and such because I get very excited about it. Alan was looking at it yesterday and he's like, oh my God, I love this book. So even he had some
Thank you.
questions for you. All right, let's dive right into it. First of all, why did you write a book? Like, what's this about?
Well, so this is really based on several of my trainings. The main one was one that I wrote a couple of years ago called Do This, Not That, Alphabet Knowledge. And that came out of me visiting a lot of classrooms, actually doing CVA observations, and just noticing just an overemphasis on letter of the week and not really getting in depth or kind of like getting to the underneath skills. And anyway, at the end of the observation, I would have a conversation with the teachers and kind of ask, why are we doing letter of the week and why are we not looking at some of these other components of literacy and what needs to be developed before children can even approach alphabet knowledge. And at the end of the conversation, I felt like everybody would say to me, okay, what you're saying makes sense, but what do we do instead? How do we take what you're saying and implement it? And so then I created that training. And then after doing that training, I don't know how many times, and so many people coming up to me going, you should write a book, you should write a book. And then, and so I always kind of had it in the back of my mind. I kind of started making some notes about it. And then in 2020, when we were in the midst of COVID, and my youngest son went off to college, so we became empty nesters. My husband was like, this is your time to write a book. This is, there's not a whole lot going on right now. This is your time. And so I wrote my proposals and was so excited when Exchange came back to me and said they were interested in publishing it. And it just kind of went from there.
And I'm thrilled that you did because yes, there's so much good content and you happen to be such a good friend of mine. So I was very, very excited when your book came out. So let's dive right into it. Chapter 1, you really start talking about the cornerstones of language and literacy and the whole child. And I love how you're framing it in here. Literacy begins with embracing the whole child, not introducing reading and writing instruction at an early age. Our outcomes, we need to focus on strong foundations. What are some of the strong foundations that early childhood educators should think about when they want to introduce literacy and language?
I think one of the taglines I kind of have in the book is everything starts somewhere. And so really literacy and language and literacy begin at birth. It begins with us, talking with our infants and then, just having those conversations. But really looking at what all development needs to be in place for that. So, looking at, first of all the different aspects of language. And in the book, I have a chart where I tried to lay it out, and I don't think that's the end all be all chart. It's what I could put together and actually, put on a page. But like looking at what are those language skills, and I just kind of kept going a little bit deeper. What is the starting point, and how do we build upon that? So, the receptive and expressive language. Well, that hinges on our auditory processing. That hinges on our cognitive processing. When we're looking at literacy, you have the decoding aspect where you're actually decoding words and putting those sounds together to create the words and then relating those to what the word means. How does that begin? And then you have the comprehension. Well, that hinges back on language. So I tried to kind of like break that down and just kind of get deep with it.
I wanted to show the chart, so I got distracted because I had the chart out and I don't remember what page it's in, but I was going to show. You probably see it. I just had it.
It's on page 22.
Yeah, I just missed it. You see, it's right here. Yeah.
Yeah.
And this is really quite deep. This is really quite deep in terms of breaking it, separating between language and literacy. you are right. The alphabet knowledge is such a big conditioning in early childhood. And we've all done this, the letter of the week. And I'm sure there's people going to be listening, and I know there'll be more joining because I'm having texts coming and saying they're having an emergency, so they can't join. But I know they'll catch the recording. So I want to really talk about why or what to do instead of the letter of the week, because you said, what else can we do? Can you share some ideas of what teachers could do if they're so conditioned into the letter of the week?
Well, I think kind of one of the first steps or one of the things to think about is kind of changing the mindset of, and one of the things I say in the book is alphabet knowledge, it's necessary. It has to be developed for literacy, but it's not sufficient on its own. So I think it's kind of taking a step back and looking at what all literacy entails, and seeing, again, like alphabet knowledge is there, but it's a small component of it. So I think it's us stepping back and focusing on all the other foundations as well. And then one of the things I kind of talk about too is before children can even approach alphabet knowledge, there are certain things that have to be developed. And that's really kind of how I broke the chapters down too. And, it's looking at the visual perception, which is, this is not eyesight, but it's our brain's ability to interpret what's coming in from the eyes. Well, before you can distinguish different letters, your brain has to develop that process. So what do we put into the classroom that can promote that? And then the other aspect is phonological awareness, but specifically phonemic awareness, which is the brain's ability to isolate and hear and identify the smallest units of sound. Well, before children can assign sounds to letters, what sound does B make? Well, before, a child can go and actually assign it, their brain has to develop that phonemic awareness. So how do we approach that? And then I put in there the actual handwriting aspect. We have children doing, we want to see them writing, but it's not a matter of just putting a pencil in their hand. It's their whole body developing, and not just the fine motor skills, but the whole entire gross motor skills and the internal senses that can support that actual handwriting. That's a very intricate process. So I kind of look at it like, what are things that we implement, or what environment do we create to support the development of those foundational skills? And then that will support alphabet knowledge when the time comes. So it's still looking at the alphabet, it's still looking at literacy, but it's just kind of making sure we've got those foundations in place first.
I love how you're really again and again referencing back to the whole child, the eyesight, the physical, you mentioned the letter writing, and that's all physical, that's all small group, right? So the physical connection. Talk some more about the connection between physical development, because you call it the forgotten domain. And I love your connection with the eyesight and the brain. There's somewhere in your book, I've highlighted so many things, where it talks about the brain does what it does to cope with what's happening. And we look at it as behavior, like challenging behavior on the outside, but the brain is doing something else. Can you talk about both of those things? How does that show up?
So on the physical development, I'm super, super passionate about physical development. And a lot of that stems from the journey I took as a parent with my oldest son, Mason. And in fact, when you get the book, you'll see a picture. I put a picture of him in the 4th grade in there. And he had to do that picture right there. And I always say Mason is almost 25 years old. He has given me full permission to talk about him. But he did pretty extensive occupational physical therapy. Yeah, this is him in the.
See it. I don't know if you can see it, but he's got like a t-shirt around him, and he's poking his head out of the armhole, I'm guessing, or the neck hole or something.
Yes, it was a sleeveless vest, and so he would request to wear that every day. And I was kind of like, well, it's just this little fashion statement, but really, it was a coping mechanism, because a lot of his muscles were so underdeveloped that he had difficulty staying in the chair, but it was so subtle you didn't realize it. So that's what he would do. And his 4th grade teacher, who was amazing, took that picture and sent it to me and said, this is how your child learns best. And so he would use that vest to keep his legs up close to him and keep him stabilized, because when you looked at like his neck and torso were fairly weak, his abs were weak, the back of his hamstrings were too tight, so it was uncomfortable for him just to sit. And then his vestibular system was underdeveloped. So that vest is how he pulled himself together and kept himself in the chair. And I remember the occupational therapist saying to me, how can your son even pay attention and learn in class when his focus is just keeping himself in the chair? And then she went on to say, your son is not the exception, he's becoming the norm, because our children are not playing and running around and having the big gross motor experiences that generations past have, because we're worried they're going to get hurt. Well, we've contained them so much, they're not developing these muscles and they're not developing these senses, and the body doesn't know how to work as a team. And so that's one of the reasons occupational therapy is a growing field, because children are not getting the opportunities for their bodies to develop as much as they should. And I think that's when I really became super, super passionate about, okay, we need to be looking at this domain, and this domain. And I'm not a big, I'm not a fan about talking about school readiness. I think early childhood is so much more, but that is our reality. But when we start looking, okay, getting children ready for kindergarten, physical development needs to be just as focused on as anything else.
I'm curious. Did you notice his torso and muscles were not quite developed before he reached 4th grade, before he started doing this? And what do you think his significance of this was? Like, what was his brain trying to do when he was trying to contain and listen?
So one of the things that I say throughout the book is children's brains tell their bodies what they need, and then their bodies and their actions tell us. And
say that again. That's too powerful. Say that again. Slow down and say it again, because I really want us to really understand this.
Children's brains tell their bodies what they need, and then their bodies and their actions tell us.
And we can then look at it just as challenging behaviors on the outside, because that brain is telling that body what they need. So they're doing something that may look like challenging behavior.
Exactly. And when you look at how, from the physical development standpoint, and specifically the internal sense of the vestibular system, which is our sense of balance, it develops by being challenged. Like, this is why children are always wanting to hang upside down on things or spin around, because the brain's telling their body, we need this movement. And if we're sitting in a group time and they're fidgeting and moving around, it really is in response to their brain going, we've got to get this going. And I think, there's a lot of different opportunities for children's bodies to tell us, what they need. With Mason, his was, I think, like, his were things like he would hunch over on the desk. He was always kind of, slouching, more so of that nature. And I will say his were, I think, kind of so subtle that when I finally took him to the OT, like, all the teachers and his pediatrician, and even I had his PE teacher from elementary school in a training like 6 or 7 years ago, and she was like, I never recognized that, But
so it didn't happen. What I'm hearing is it didn't happen till elementary. So in early childhood, how was his behavior in early childhood that it didn't get picked up?
I think with him specifically, I think because he was the quiet child, and he was the child who blended into the background. And so he was not, he's not one that was ever, disruptive, or one who ever made a fuss. He just kind of blended into the background. So
he conformed.
Yes. And I think it was like, he always did what he was supposed to do. I can tap back to his kindergarten teacher telling me his pre-K teacher saying, like, when they were sitting in group time, that he couldn't just sit, with his legs crisscrossed, that he would have to move to the side, or he would, so there were some things there, but overall, I think he just was so quiet that he kind of got overlooked in a way.
And you would never think of vision, physical, in connection with literacy and language, because we are so focused on the letter of the week, and we are so focused on the sight words, and we're so focused, on the word wall and things like this, that there's a whole child, and this is why I love the title of your book, The Whole
Thank you.
Child, right? It's the whole child alphabet. And I'm really so happy that you're coming at it from a kind of a refreshing perspective and trying to bring all these pieces together of the puzzle.
And that's what I tried to do, is kind of fill in those gaps and really kind of give us, the early childhood professionals, the tools to have the conversations. And I think having the conversations, especially when it comes to like school readiness, so that we can say, all right, yeah, it looks like children are playing, but let me show you what they're developing when they're playing, just from a child-led play perspective, and how this builds the foundation for them to eventually be successful readers and writers when the time is right, when the time comes for them. But even things like you had just mentioned, like sight words and stuff. Well, when you look at visual processing, that visual closure, which is like, if you see part, like say, like if you're like looking in your closet for a pair of shoes and you see just the toe of the shoe hanging out, like your brain goes, oh, it's this shoe. The brain kind of closes that image. Well, that is necessary for sight words. That's necessary. That's what helps us read quickly, because our brain can kind of see the first part of the word and then processes, oh, this is what the rest of the word is. So, that's important for that literacy aspect.
I just find it so fascinating how fascinating our brain is and how hard it works to compensate for all kinds of things to bring it together. And I think we don't give it enough credit. I am going to open it up to questions. So if you guys want to think about questions you want to get answered, but before we want to go there, I do want to talk about play, because you and I have done many conversations about play, and we both are absolutely ardent advocates of authentic play. How would you define authentic play and the role that grown-ups play in that authentic play? Because there's such a misconception of free play. Center time means free play, and it's chaos, and nobody learns in chaos. Do you want to talk a bit more about that?
So to me, like when I talk about that authentic child-led play, to me, the child is the core. The child, it's of the child. The child, they create the play. They come up with the play scenario. They create rules of the play. It's up to them how long the play lasts. It's all about them. And our role as the adult is to, first of all, in the beginning, design the environment. And I think it's very important to when we're talking about authentic play, that doesn't mean that we're designing an activity. It doesn't mean that we're putting materials out with, oh, they're going to sort this. We design an environment with materials that the children are interested in. It's of their interest.
It's provocation. It's an invitation.
Yes.
To play.
Right. And so we put that out there, and then our role as the adult is to get out of the way. And, this is our time. If you have to do any sort of assessment or observation, this is the perfect time to do that, because the play is a child's real world. And this is really where they're showing us what they know and what they're trying to figure out, and what is it that they want to learn more of. And our role is to step back and just watch. And then that's how we figure out how to continually design the environment, what other provisions to put into the environment. But I also think it's very important to keep in mind that our role is also to be available, because I think that is so powerful when a child comes to you and says, will you play with me? And that we have the opportunity, we're not too busy doing other things, that we can go sit down with them and play with them. I mean, that's so powerful. And we build the relationship with the child and follow their lead. Or if they bring something to us, I've drawn this picture, and we can sit down and go, can you tell me about it? Would you like me to write your story for you? And think of that from that literacy aspect. But I think being available is one of the most powerful things that we can do.
Time, right? So I am curious about the center time and free play, because quite a lot of the small groups happen during center time, and children get called for small group. What are your thoughts on that, and what are the alternates to doing that? If we think that might interrupt, what else can we do to make sure that the curriculum gets done, because curriculum means that, you know, you're working on fine motor skills, or you're working on cutting, or whatever it is that I'm doing in small group. How would we do that?
Right.
What are
Well,
your
I think
thoughts on that?
so one of the things to kind of think about before I kind of hone in exactly or specifically on the small group, but think about, you know, if you do have a curriculum that guides what you're doing, step back and look at what are the goals of that curriculum, and think of how you can put things in the environment that's still going to support that. So is it, you know, is it things on fine motor skills? Well, anytime children are playing with manipulatives or blocks, or even, you know, clothing in the dramatic play center, that's going to be working those fine motor skills. So I think sometimes it's kind of like changing our lens of how we look at it. But personally, pulling children from their free play, their child-led play for small group is something I am not a fan of. Because to me, if we've designed this environment and we know it's of the child's interest, and when children get in there and they start playing, they're building their curiosity, and they're building their attention, and they're building all these other, you know, skills that we're talking about. In my mind, it doesn't make sense to me to pull them from that, to interrupt their play for our agenda. So an alternative, and I always did this when I was teaching, is I would, you know, I always allowed an hour and a half of open-ended playtime in the mornings and again in the afternoon. And when the children would kind of get playing, if I had something specific that I needed them to do, a lot of times I would just kind of gather those materials and I would go plop myself down somewhere in the room. You know, it might be on the floor, it might be, you know, I would just sit down and start drawing at a table. And what happens is, if we have a relationship with the children, usually when we sit down, they choose, and that's a big part of child-led play. It's their choice. They choose to come to us. And usually the conversation goes to the teacher, what are you doing? And I can say, oh, this is what I'm doing. Would you like to join me? And it's still their choice.
It's an invitation.
Correct. And they might say, no, I want to go back over here to the blocks or whatever it is that they're doing. But a lot of times they're going to be where you are, you know? And so then it's just that kind of opens up a conversation, and that opens up, you know, that kind of lends itself to maybe going into something that's a little bit more teacher designed, but it's still the child's choice to come in. And I think it's very important to know it's the child's choice to leave at whatever point they want to. But I think if what we're doing is developmentally appropriate, of their interests, and then we can look at it from the lens of, okay, just by playing with these blocks, we're hitting all these skills, or meeting all these objectives. I think that kind of changes like how we approach an activity or an experience that that we need to, you know, kind of, I don't want to say check off the list, but to me, it just kind of changes the paradigm of thought a little bit.
Yeah, is switching it on his head, that, you know, we've been doing all these things for 100 years. We've all drunk the Kool-Aid on it, like do the small group, that's better for them. You're challenging that, and you're saying, well, actually not, because it's an invitation. If they come, they're probably more engaged anyway, because they're excited about what you're doing. And if you bring cool folder games, or you've done some cool things that you want to play with them, they will get engaged and the concept will be learned. I'm going to open it up to questions now, because we're at a halfway point, and then I have more on the other side if you guys can think of questions. But open it up now. What are you wondering about? What would you like to know?
Okay, I have a question.
Okay.
So one of the questions, I'm a director, and one of the questions that I have in my interview is, tell me about an early literacy activity. In our school, we have more 0 to 3 age than we have in preschool. Could you give, every time I ask what is an early literacy activity you would do with, you know, a 2-year-old, the first thing I hear is read a book, which is absolutely great. But could you give me some more ideas that I could get them to thinking more outside of just reading a book?
Well, and one of the things that I talk about in the book is when we start breaking down, you know, all the components of literacy and all the foundations that need to be developed, you really start recognizing that an activity doesn't have to be labeled as literacy for it to support literacy. And that's one of my goals with the book, is that we can kind of look at, okay, we're building with blocks. Well, a lot of times we connect that with more of a STEM or math or science, but really and truly that is literacy. When you start looking at how it's developing the physical skills, well, that will support handwriting, hearing the sounds of the blocks, or if it's, with our younger children, let's say we have soft blocks, if they might be crawling around and moving. Well, that is crossing the midline. Well, that's going to eventually help with reading as well. But I think it's kind of thinking outside that box, and again, I think we do kind of tend to go, okay, like read a book and sing a song. But to me, when you kind of look at the whole child and what all those foundational skills, almost any type of activity will eventually support literacy. I think it's just a matter of the lens you look at it and being able to identify it.
Okay.
Mine is more of a comment. I'm kind of looking.
Okay.
TV going to. And so I liked how you really said that it's not about that we're not doing the letters and the words and the literacy piece, and that's really necessary, but we need to, that shouldn't be our whole focus. Because I worked for an early Head Start program for a long time, and we really talked a lot about that it was more the child led, but we don't have letters. We don't have those kinds of things, even in our older twos classes, where really what we're finding is that, absolutely, if a child, we have lots of kids that are interested. They love numbers and letters, and they love reading, and they love books, and they may be ready earlier than some kids. It's about following that child's lead wherever they are. And if they're struggling with attention and that kind of thing, to really look at those gross motor and fine motor skills.
Exactly. And one of the things that I love about, to me, if when we have the child-led play, it's pretty amazing how organically a lot of this stuff will start to happen. So if you look at emergent writing, not handwriting, but the story composition aspect, well, that begins with an older infant in their high chair taking their hand through their applesauce. Well, that's the beginning of mark making. And you can start tracking that into when we start giving children just blank paper and crayons, and they might do a random scribble that turns into a controlled scribble. And eventually, if we give them enough opportunity and we put this in our environment where it's inviting to them and they can connect it to their play, eventually what's going to happen is they're going to bring it to us and say, can you write this letter? Can you write this word? And that really is kind of that beginning of that alphabet knowledge, where they start recognizing that a letter exists and it serves a purpose, but it's needed to convey a message. And it is amazing when we design the environment and let children kind of have these opportunities, how organically it starts to happen and how much quicker they learn it when it connects to something that they're wanting to do. If we introduce a letter that has nothing to do with their world, well, there's no reason for them to learn it, but if they have a new little brother named Thomas, and we're all about Thomas right now, but the letter T is so important to them, and they're going to learn that immediately.
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, I love that.
It's very interesting to watch around 3 years old, but suddenly they become aware of the letters around them, and they're curious and they want to learn. And it is such a beautiful blossoming. I've seen it with our grandchildren. We've had, 3 of them gone through the 3-year-old space, and it's just so exciting when suddenly they're like, can you write my name? Like, this is N for Nalini. I remember her getting so excited about it. And Ava was A everywhere. Like, that's an A for Ava. That's like, it was such a strong connection. And you're right. If it has meaning to them, they're more excited to learn it versus drill and kill.
Exactly.
And I've seen classrooms where the teacher was so focused on, you need to write your name. And this was years ago, but you need to write your name, or no, we're going to sit here until you write, that child hated it. I mean, they were miserable because, and it wasn't something that was fun, where ultimately we want language and literacy and we want it to be fun. And when we start forcing it, when children aren't ready, they just, it's not fun anymore. And then it becomes, I don't want to do this.
Right.
And
Yeah,
that
and when
fine
this,
was writing.
yeah, one of the stories that I shared in the book, so I have two sons, and this is really the only story I tell about Jackson, but Jackson, like, just, and he's 21 now. He's a senior at Texas A&M, but he like just had no desire to learn the letters. Like, and I remember him even saying, he's like, I don't care. I don't want to learn them. And you know, at the end of when he was 3, he only knew J. At the end of pre-K, he only knew like J, M for Mason. My husband's Jason. He knew S for me and B for our last name. And that was it. And he was fine. Like he was okay. And then we go to kindergarten, and it was in October, and we go to the parent teacher conference, and Jason and I are ready to hear that Jackson doesn't know any letters, because that's all the other teachers have been telling us. And the kindergarten teacher's like, oh, he knows all his upper lowercase letters. And we're like, wait, what happened? What happened was he had a huge crush on his kindergarten teacher, and he wanted her attention. Like, he was like, and what better way to get her attention than to show her how smart he was by knowing the letters? Like, and that was, you know, that it became important to him. So, you know, that the child's intrinsic motivation plays into this as well. So,
And that was October. School started in August, and he mastered it all. That's crazy stuff.
All of a sudden he was excited to know that.
He had been submerged in it, and it all just made connections, and off he went. That's so
Yeah.
fun. Any other questions? Any other wonderings?
I have. Well, first, congratulations on your book. I
Thank
just had a
you.
chance to begin it, but it seemed very clearly set out, and I enjoyed reading the bit that I started. This is just a bit of a crazy wondering that came into my mind as I was looking at it, that we're more and more in kind of global situation, and more exposed to other countries and other languages and other alphabets. And I just wondered, because I'd heard that in terms of music, and Chinese, there's such a thing as perfect pitch, that some people can hear a note and just know what it is, and it's a thing that's sort of supposed to be born with you. But in China, the percentage of children who have this is like 80%. And that's because the Chinese language is a tonal language. It has sort of high, middle, low expressions of each word. And I was just interested how, you know, we know that bilingual families, where they speak 2 languages, affects the child's brain development. And I wondered whether, you know, different alphabets, and whether that was something we could learn from.
Yeah, as far as like the different alphabets, I'm not sure on that, but from the different language aspect, you know, every language has a unique phonemes. And so, and I think that's one of the reasons it makes no sense here in Texas that we don't start foreign languages till like late middle school, high school, because when you look at how the brain develops the ability to hear and produce sound, it's from hearing it. And really and truly, if you look at infant brains, like an infant's brain has the ability to hear and produce any sound that exists in the world, which is just absolutely amazing. But our brain is a use it or lose it system, and it's a lean muscle. So it starts kind of pruning out. Okay, I don't need to produce this French sound. I need to kind of weed that out, but I need to strengthen hearing, you know, English or whatever language is being heard. And so I think it's important, if you do have or within a household where you have multiple languages being spoken, that the child is hearing both equally, especially in those early years, because the brain really is tuning in to hearing, you know, hearing those different phonemes.
Yeah.
And something that's kind of interesting when you look at dyslexia. Dyslexia really is the inability to hear and produce phonemes. That's why people with dyslexia have a hard time spelling, because they can't break down and hear those sounds. And that's one of the reasons that dyslexics have a hard time learning foreign languages, because it's like, okay, you struggle so much in English. How could you possibly develop the ability to hear and produce a sound in a different language. But the brain really is amazing how it is designed for survival, and what our environment presents, it really does kind of develop itself to survive in that environment.
Yeah.
Fascinating, right? So I want to talk about some of the debunking of the myths, unless there's some other questions.
We have one more.
Go for it.
You want to ask it? Okay.
We got some shy people.
Yeah. So Carla had mentioned that is it family?
Yeah.
Okay. That she has some family that is bilingual, and part of the concern with both languages is that they've heard that language will be delayed if they are hearing both and teaching both.
So and I'm kind of going back to, like, my original major in college was speech and language pathology. And so I'm kind of pulling like some from older research, but I haven't seen anything that's gone against what I'm about to say. But the belief used to be that if the child's hearing both languages equally and there is not any sort of language disorder that might be connected with the brain, that there really should not be a delay in either language being learned. The belief is if something does exist that would prevent the child from learning one language, it is going to affect both. But I think the belief is like it's, that learning two languages at one time really should not delay one or the other.
I have heard that too. So I'm curious if that's a myth or if it's for real. If you're learning 2 or 3 or more languages, that you will be slower to speak because your brain is comprehending 2. So maybe you wouldn't start making real words that understand, like you can understand as actual words and not just gobbledygook till past 3. Is that a myth?
And again, I'm kind of going back to years ago, like probably like 30 years ago when we were kind of talking about this. But, I think that if the brain has a language issue, it's going to exist in both languages. But as far as I've heard, I haven't heard anything that's debunked that. But I think it is, as long as there's no language disorder there, that both languages, because that's all the child knows, and so I don't think there's any reason to believe that it would delay the development of one of them.
So if we don't look at, there'll be a delay in one of the languages, could there be both the languages? They might be slower to speak because they're comprehending and making sense in 2 different, and they maybe have somehow mixed words. Sometimes we say this because our daughter, when we were in Scotland, I was trying to raise her with Hindi, and she was already 3 and she was using a lot of her own made up words. And I think what she was trying to do was put sounds that sounded like Hindi and sounded like English, and they were coming together, and I didn't know any better. Now I know better. But so I gave it up right before she turned 3, because I was getting nervous, like, oh my gosh, I'm delaying her in language. Oh my gosh, she's never going to speak. Oh my God, I've delayed her, I've confused her. And now the research that I know is like, if I had just stuck with it, she would have learned both of them on the other side of 3, but I gave up just the other side of 3.
Yeah. Oh yeah, you should have pressed on.
You know better, you do better.
Exactly. And that's something I'll have to kind of go look at, if there's what the recent research says about that. But like I said, I'm kind of
curious. I'm curious because the person who asked that is bilingual. So Carla or Angela, did you both learned English and Spanish? So do you feel like you were behind your peers?
That's a good question.
For me, when I was growing up, I would always do Spanish at home with my mom and dad. But then once I got into school, I forgot the Spanish and I understood it, but I wouldn't speak it. I would answer in English. And like for Carla over here, I'll let her say.
For me, I was just telling them that, like, when I started school, I only knew Spanish. So when we went to school, they told my mom that we needed to be spoken only in English. So then 2nd grade came around and I forgot all my Spanish. So same now, like I can speak it and I understand it, but I speak Spanglish and then I can't write it or read it correctly. So it's like it threw me off on both languages because there's even words in English that kind of look like Spanish words and it throws my brain completely off.
So this
So
was
if
even
you've been
past
exposed
5,
the
right?
whole
Kinder.
time instead of, yeah.
So we're talking about stick with it to 3, but you're saying stick with it even past elementary because that's when you forgot it.
Yeah, and
Wow.
I was telling them, I was like, my 4th grade teacher was like, no, keep talking to her in Spanish. So in 4th grade was when my mom finally did. At home, we speak Spanish. At school, you can speak English. And like anytime we went home and spoke English, my mom was like, nope, we're speaking Spanish here, only Spanish. And then after that, I think we were like in 6th, 7th grade that we were like both languages at home and at school.
That's it, right? I think we've answered our own question. They both have to be consistently spoken and exposed. And kind of what Stacy you were talking about, if they're exposed to it, they'll get there with both together. But if we don't expose them, then one drops off.
And if
Yeah.
you're looking from the aspect of phonemic development, like kind of age 8 is at least like for English, like age 8 is kind of like when you think all the phonemes should kind of be in there by that place. So age 8 tends to be kind of, I think, a platform almost in a way. Like, yeah.
3rd grade, lots going on in 3rd grade. Okay, I want to talk about some of your myths that you've got going on in here. This chapter fascinated me, debunking the myths. Let's talk about the myth of school ready. The myth is children need to be ready for kindergarten. Part of them being ready is being able to name all their letters. If we don't spend time on that in the early years, they will be behind when they get to elementary. Myth or true?
Well, I'm sure y'all know what I'm going to say on that, but yeah.
Go for it.
Well, and I think this is one of the things that, like, and when I was writing this book, like, I did not look up any like state standard, any like, what the state of Texas says from pre-K guidelines, because that's always changing. I had somebody ask, did you look at science of reading? No, I didn't want any of those influences. I just wanted to look at development. And I think that when we talk about literacy and children being successful, I think it kind of comes back to, again, the alphabet is necessary, but it's not sufficient on its own. And if a child, we can do all this drilling and killing and children can learn all their letters, but if we've neglected all these other things, they're not going to be, we're not setting them up for success for future, reading and writing. And I know that we can say, well, our standards say this and all these other things, but the reality is just knowing all your letters does not mean that you're ready, for kindergarten. And what are other things that we're doing that's going to support the alphabet, support literacy in addition to just being exposed to the alphabet?
You just said something that was really powerful. You said, yes, knowing the alphabets is not on its own. We have to expose it to them. So yes, the kindergarten readiness says, come to kinder ready, knowing your letters. But if you had played with it and had fun with it and the child was engaged with it, they would subconsciously, consciously be absorbing it, not just drill and kill. Yeah, I think
right,
that is
exactly.
Yeah, it just flips the mindset. But do you have any talking points in terms of saying it to parents or saying it to stakeholders? Like, everybody's pushing this letter of the week down your throat. Like, you got to know this.
I think it comes, and I always found that when I have people who say, oh, but what about this? I always go, I know you're excited to see this. I know, especially parents, I know you're excited to see your child do this, or I know that this is something we're looking down the road that children need to do. But let's step back. Let's look at what all literacy entails, and let's look at where that begins and what supports what. What's that starting point? How do we build upon that? And I think that when you can really and truly talk about that, like have that knowledge and feel confident in it and go, let's get intricate about these things. It's not just learning the letters. We've got to look at the visual processing. We have to look at the phonological awareness. We have to look at all the aspects of physical development. And when you can start talking about that and go, we've got to put these things in place before children can be successful with this, I really think that helps with the conversation. And then if parents or stakeholders go, well, how do they learn that? Then you go through play. They can't learn it without that play component. And so, but I think it's us as a profession truly understanding and embracing those foundational developmental skills that need to be in place.
Leslie, were you trying to unmute? You got close to the
I
screen.
was just going to type it. I was actually typing it. Can you talk just a little bit about how the use of television and computers and iPads and all that is affecting language and literacy?
So what has been found, especially like if you start looking at like just television coming into play, like in the 60s and 70s, you can already start to see kind of a decline of the conversations that take place in the house. I think that when children are playing, and I kind of use this example in the book, like if you go to like just a grocery store or you're in a restaurant and we plug children into their iPads, and it might be like a alphabet app that they're using, but the reality is when they're plugged in and looking down, they're not living in the three-dimensional world, so they're not hearing all the sounds around them. Well, that connects to phonological awareness, which is necessary, for literacy. They're not seeing these three-dimensional things and reaching for stuff, which is really working. Not only the eye-hand coordination, which ties into handwriting, but all the visual perception things, the visual closure, the visual constancy, that's not developed just looking at a 2D screen. So, and then just, children being stationary and not moving their bodies, well, that's not developing the overall body as well. And so, I think that there's a time and place for screens. I think it's just kind of like everything else. It's part of our society. We have to teach children how to use them responsibly, but we've got to make sure that it's not taking over all their time and we're depriving them of the opportunities to just develop that whole child. But I definitely, to me, this is my personal opinion. I believe that screens and especially the handheld devices really is delaying a lot of the developmental skills that need to be in place for children. So,
yeah, you're preaching to the choir.
Yeah.
I 100% agree with you. I think a lot of the behaviors are also happening because the interactions are not being met and social emotional is not happening. So, that's my jam. So I always go there.
Yeah.
All right, some more myths. Any more questions? Or I can keep going with the myths because these myths are crazy over here. Any more questions?
Yeah.
You guys have a question? Leslie?
No.
Okay. So you have another myth of the teaching day. And this is what you're saying. We break our program into teaching day, before and after school care. We focus on academic skills, including alphabet instruction from 9 to 2, and then let the children play and they're before or after that. Okay, what's the problem with that?
So I put that one in because my belief is if children are playing, they're learning, and they can't learn without playing, they can't play without learning. And so I think that when we hone our day into just from 9 a.m. to 2 p.m., we're not giving credit to everything else that could possibly be going on.
Can I play the devil's advocate here?
Mm-hmm.
And can we go deeper with that? So in fact, we have schools in the coaching membership that have told me we are an academic structured school. I have done PD for such schools, and when they call me, they're like, I just want you to know we're an academic structured school. So we can't let them play all the time. We're not play-based. So let's talk more about this, because there's a misconception of what play is and what the role of the grown-up is. And we talked about this earlier already. But if they need to get academics in, if they have a curriculum, that's their philosophy, that's their mission, vision, they're standing behind it, what would you recommend is an appropriate way to make that play engaging or learning opportunity so that they can check that box of academic requirement?
So I think there's like two ways to look at it. If there's like a specific activity you have to do, it is like required, I would say
part of your curriculum. It's part of your curriculum.
Yes. Yeah. And let's say it's something like worksheet related or something of that nature. How can we flip it where it's a little bit more engaging, more hands-on? But really, truly, I firmly believe that like it's stepping back and looking at, okay, what again are the objectives of this curriculum, and lay those out, and then look at, okay, how can these develop through play? Actually, not even how, they will develop through play. How do we identify it, and how do we make that visible to other people? And so it's, to me, it's just, again, kind of shifting that paradigm and looking at it through a different lens.
Yeah. And play is not free for all. Do whatever you want.
Correct.
Play, the grown-ups role is intentional, thoughtful, looking at the objective and saying, okay, if I really want them to recognize, I don't know, the shapes, colors, numbers, letters, they seem to be just putting them down the kids' throats every minute. If I really want them to recognize that, can that be a game that they could play? So
I think so. Yeah. And I think too, like maybe looking at like, okay, and I, again, I'm a huge, I am all about the child-led play, but there also is a time and space for a developmentally appropriate teacher directed. And so maybe it's utilizing that time a little bit more, but then also giving credit to the child-led play and all of the, and to me, the play is not about creating results. So I want to be careful in saying this, but the play does create results. So I think it's just us identifying it differently, looking at it differently, and being able to identify all these amazing things that are taking place. And I also think it's important to look and see what happens if children are not playing. What are they missing out on that
they
we want
need a
them to
behavior
develop?
coach.
Yeah, exactly. So, but yeah,
they get frustrated. I mean, if they're not allowed to play and express, it becomes very difficult. It becomes very difficult.
And one of the things I always say, like to help us kind of relate to that, like when I'm doing a training, so us as adults, if we're sitting in a training or we're sitting somewhere, like we hit a point that we want to be done, that we are, that's why we give breaks when we do trainings. That's why we have opportunity, because we want to be in that control. And if we're constantly guiding what children are doing, they have no control over their day. And that's when they start getting agitated and we start to see some of those behaviors. We're the same as adults. So it's kind of that same thing. It's kind of respecting they need to have that control.
Yeah,
so.
Agreed. Okay, wrapping up, last minute thoughts. Any ahas anybody wants to share? What did you learn today? What are you walking away with? What was something new, different, aha, reinforced? Okay, who wants to share?
Angela wants to.
I got volunteered to.
You volunteered.
Voluntold.
I think the best thing is for me that I liked is that looking at things through a different lens, because a lot of teachers don't see that. They just think, oh, it's just this, they're just acting out and we just need to send them home or something else, and not really looking at it through a different lens of what's going on in their little brains and what are they trying to show us and tell us.
Right.
That was so powerful, right? The brain tells the body what the body needs. I just love that sentence so much. And then we have to make sense of what they're showing us. I love that sentence. What else?
Anybody else? Helen? Brian? Swan, do you have anything? No.
You guys are hilarious. You guys are hilarious.
I know. We're not doing it.
You are too funny. This has been insightful. Thank you so much. Your passion comes through, Stacy. I wish you all the best of luck with this book.
Thank
I will want everybody to buy it. We'll put the link to go buy it. And I definitely promote this. You're taking on kind of sort of a big deal. Like this is the elephant in the room and you're taking it on. And, I'm so proud of you because you're going there. Yeah. It is so much more than just learning the alphabet and the letter and the number and this, that, right? There's so much more. And you're bringing it all together in a very holistic way, in a very natural way, and an easy to digest way. Like you're speaking our language. You're not speaking over here research language. You're speaking our language. It makes
that means so much. Thank you very. I was joking when I was writing the book. I'm like, it's either gonna make or break me. Because I do push some buttons in it, but it's all said with love.
No, I think it was needed. Any last minute thoughts that you would like the members of this group to know? And I know others will listen to the recording because it is going to be so valuable. What would your wrapping up words of wisdom be?
I just really embracing the whole child, and us, really recognizing that, those first few years of life is about developing the whole child, not just getting children ready for school. There's so much more there, and it all goes hand in hand, but just really embracing that whole child. And if you get the book and you read it, and you have any questions, let me know.
Get it, get it, get it. I'm going to share the link again. Please get it. I highly recommend it. And you'll be supporting a friend. You see?
Yes, thank you.
Encourage and support friends that start out and put their necks out and write a book. I think we should do that for people. So thank you for taking the time. I would love to have you come back again. Our membership is revamping in January, and we're going bigger and expanding. And I think maybe the next time I might even put it on Facebook and do live for other people joining us as well, because you have a message to get out there, and I'd love to help support you.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. I would love to come back.
Let's do it. Let's do it.
All
You're
right.
always welcome.
Thank you. Thank
you.
Thank you all.
All right. Thank you for joining. And I'm going to stop this now.